Chapter 21 Meatball. "Hey," Ryan said, as he gently brushed his fingertips against Lauren's cheek to wake her up. His hairy chest was bare, and he wore a set of loose jeans that were several sizes too big for him. Lauren opened her eyes and realized that she was on a sofa, squeezed up inside a Bob the Builder sleeping bag. Sunlight blazed through the curtains. "Anna's making you lunch," Ryan said. "Lunch?" Lauren gasped. "What time is it?" 1:10. "Blimey! Does Zara know where we are?" "I've spoken to her." Ryan nodded. "She's fine about last night and everything. She's on her way down in the car to pick us up." As Lauren unzipped the sleeping bag and sat up, the events of the night before came flooding back. Once the last batch of dogs had been dealt with, everyone had headed into the house to clean themselves, but the hot water had run out. After a freezing cold shower, Lauren had toweled off and changed into an oversized t-shirt and shorts that belonged to Miranda. As Lauren wandered through to the kitchen, her arms and shoulders ached from the effort of scrubbing the dogs. "Hello," Anna said brightly, moving across to the dining table and pouring Lauren a glass of orange juice. "How does vegan French toast sound?" "Sounds great," Lauren grinned, hitching up her massive shorts as she sat down. She looked around and noticed that everything was spotless, with no trace of the paraphernalia they'd used the night before. "Are all the dogs gone?" Ryan nodded as he sat next to Lauren. "Lou took some. Adelaide and Miranda left with the rest." "Oh," Lauren said, feeling sad because she would have liked a chance to see them all cleaned up and happy. Anna's French toast came dusted with icing sugar, strawberries, and slices of melon on the side. The hot, sweet bread was exactly what Lauren felt like after the exertion of the night before. "I'd better be going, Ryan," Anna said, once she'd switched off the oven and rinsed the baking tray under the tap. "I've got to pick Kat and Polly up from school at 3. Would you mind washing Lauren's dishes and locking up? You can hand the keys back to Phyllis. She's always up at the protest site on the weekend." "No problem at all," Ryan nodded. "Don't wait around here on our account. Zara should be here in half an hour or so." After eating and waving goodbye to Anna on the doorstep, Lauren found her trainers and wandered outside for some air and a final look at the stables. She felt a lump in her throat as she imagined the excited puppies sitting in the backs of cars and vans, smelling of disinfectant as they headed for sanctuary. She also felt proud. She'd worked hard, she'd been part of a great team, and there were no doubts in her mind that rescuing the dogs was the right thing to do. Even if stealing animals was against the law, and even if some animal experiments were for some important medical research, there was never an excuse for forcing animals to live in their own filth. As she headed back towards the house, Lauren heard a high-pitched noise. She stood still for a couple of seconds while she convinced herself that it was one of the stable doors creaking in the wind. But as she headed away, she heard it again, and this time it sounded uncannily like a whimpering puppy. "Hello?" Lauren said loudly, then realized she was being daft. It wasn't as if the dog was going to start a conversation. She considered running back to the house and fetching Ryan, but the dog was close by and she didn't want to lose it. In fact, she could see 30 meters clear in all directions, so the dog had to be inside one of the stables. The stable doors were split into 2 halves so that horses could poke their heads out. Lauren opened the top part of one door and leaned inside to flip on the light switch. "Look at you," Lauren giggled as she saw a tiny dog cowering on the bare concrete floor near the back wall. "Did they leave you behind?" She pushed the bottom part of the door open and stepped inside. The brown-faced pup's only previous human encounters had been with kennel hands, vets, and people intent on dunking its head in a bowl of disinfectant, so it was less than delighted to see Lauren, and made this clear by baring its teeth. "I won't hurt you," Lauren said softly, as the dog backed into the corner. As Lauren bent to grab the growling dog, her giant shorts slid down her legs and the pup dashed for the stable door, which she'd carelessly left ajar. By the time she'd yanked up her shorts, the pup was out on the stable yard. "Ryan!" Lauren screamed frantically, as the dog belted along the gravel path leading to the paddock. She was desperate to get hold of the pup before it reached the trees, because she'd never find it once it got tangled up in the undergrowth. Fortunately, the dog had spent its entire life in a cage and hadn't got the knack of running. As Lauren closed in, with one hand holding up her shorts and the other ready to scoop up the dog, it stumbled over its own front legs and flipped head over heels onto its back. But the little thing rolled out of Lauren's grasp and headed back along the courtyard towards Ryan, who'd raced away from the washing up to investigate the yelping. He stood in the middle of the path, spreading himself out wide to grab the puppy belting towards him as Lauren charged after it. Ryan got his hand on fur, but the dog turned its body around and wriggled free. "Sod!" Ryan yelled, as Lauren carried on the chase. The pup was tiring, and she'd almost caught up by the time it cut down the side of the house towards the road. It was barely 2 meters ahead of Lauren when it reached the gravel driveway at the front of the house. She heard a noise and looked up, taking her eyes off the dog just in time to see Zara's giant blue people carrier bearing down on her. Lauren experienced blind terror as the vehicle closed her down. Time froze, and her eyes fixed on Zara's sunglasses and gaping mouth inside the car. She was running flat out and had too much momentum to stop. All she could do was put her arms in front of her face to cushion the inevitable blow. Fortunately, Zara already had her foot over the brake, and by the time Lauren clattered into the front of the vehicle, it had stopped moving. Her elbow made a hollow thud on the windscreen, catching a nerve and sending a powerful spasm towards her hand. But Lauren had survived worse, and she was determined to get her hands on the little dog before it disappeared. Too proud to let the pain show on her face, she rolled off the bonnet, gritted her teeth, and crouched down to see where the animal had gone after it disappeared between the front wheels. "Did you see it?" Lauren yelled desperately as Zara jumped out of the car. "See what?" Zara steamed. "Are you off your rocker? Running out without looking like that? I nearly flattened you." "I'm chasing after a puppy," Lauren explained as she stood back up. "It's in the bloody road!" Ryan yelled as he raced around the passenger side of the car. Zara and Lauren both looked around to see the small brown and white dog standing in the middle of the road, panting and turning its head around as if it couldn't decide which way to go. A second later, a small Nissan rounded the gently curved road and skimmed over the pup at more than 50 miles an hour. "No!" Lauren squealed, covering her eyes and expecting the worst. But Ryan kept his head and dashed onto the tarmac. The dog had been swept off its feet by the turbulent air beneath the car, and Ryan grabbed the confused animal before it knew what had almost hit it. Ryan's momentum carried him onto the other side of the carriageway, and a truck holding a loaded skip blasted its horn and swerved as he reached the verge and skidded down a slight embankment, crashing into a tangle of wild flowers. Lauren and Zara let a couple more cars pass before running through a break in the traffic. Lauren was massively relieved to see that Ryan had managed to keep the wriggling dog clutched firmly between his hands. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "I'll live," Ryan puffed, as Zara gave him a hand up. "But that truck aged me a few years." "You know what?" Lauren grinned. "I recognize that dog. The brown face and the one eye slightly lower than the other. It's the first one we cleaned last night." Ryan smiled as he turned the dog towards himself and looked into its eyes. The poor fella needs a good drink to cool down. I feel like I'm holding a hot water bottle. What are we going to do with him? Lauren asked. Can't leave him here on his Todd, Ryan said. We'll have to take him back to the cottage. He can share my room, Lauren grinned. I think this is fate. I've always wanted a dog. Only for a few days, until we can find somewhere else for him to go, Zara said tautly. Only red shirts are allowed pets, so don't let yourself get too fond of him. And it's pretty dodgy, Ryan added. Me living in a house with a beagle pup when the Alliance just rescued 73 of them? Meatball, Lauren smiled, ignoring all the warnings. I'm going to call him Meatball.